All right, I guess we'll start. Just a quick mic test. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Cool. I don't know why, but it feels like it's been longer than a week since we've last done this. It just feels way longer. Anyways, moving on. Let's do a quick review about the week prior. You guys obviously had labs due this week. They're due by midnight tonight. Yeah, new month. Maybe that's the reason why. Yeah, you guys have labs due by midnight tonight. Some of you have already handed them in. I don't tend to mark the labs till I have them all in. I don't have anybody that's requested any extensions or anything, so I mean, I should be able to start marking them tomorrow. And likely have them done before the end of the weekend. So you guys should have all your grades for the labs by the end of the week. Only a couple of people have had some issues with them. And I mean, relatively that made sense, just based on how kind of fast last class kind of went. So if you are having issues or you haven't started yet, I would definitely recommend starting, just to, make sure that you don't wind up missing the window, right? Anyways, cool. So last week we talked about setting up our application. We looked at just removing the excess stuff out of the Create React app that gets scaffolded that we didn't want. We purged it of all that stuff. We looked at import and export, so that's importing libraries from not only node modules, but also importing our own custom components that we created, as well as exporting those components. So hopefully you've gotten enough practice and that you're pretty used to it. We're going to do it a few times tonight as well. We took a look at creating a custom component. So when I say custom component, I mean more external component, right? Outside of our App Jsx file that we imported in ourselves. And we did a couple of those. And hopefully you guys remember what is required in order for a component to work. You must import React. It doesn't necessarily have to be named, but it has to be a function. It has to have a return statement, and it has to be exported. So as long as you have those in, you have a working component. The component can return null, so you can return null if you don't know what you're going to put in your component. But generally, you want to add in some JSX, which is our templating flavor that we're using, which is basically a cross between HTML and JavaScript. We took a look a little bit at props, which are the properties that we passed into a component when we call it and execute it. Anything that we add as an attribute becomes available to us within the component's definition under the props argument that is just immediately available to you. And we took a look at setting state. Both of those we are going to work with more intensely tonight, so you will get a little bit more exposure to both of those things. Actually, we're going to take a look at all the hooks that are available. That's what use state is. It's one of the hooks. We kind of created a to-do component with a very quick little visual with it. Nothing too exciting. We didn't really talk about unidirectional data flow, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and we definitely didn't complete the to-do app because we ran out of time. So let's talk a little bit about, actually before I do this, do you have any questions about last week's content before I talk about unidirectional data flow? Does anybody know what unidirectional data flow is without looking at the definition on the screen? Anybody want to take a guess at what they think it might be? Yes, that's exactly it, Alex. Yeah, 100%. Flows down. So unidirectional means one direction. It only goes in one direction, and not like the boy band, just one direction of data, right? So it goes down from the parent and flows downwards towards the children components. Unfortunately, you don't go back up through the stream unless you pass some way for it to communicate back up through the ancestral tree, right? So unidirectional means one way. Unidirectional data flow in React refers to how data is passed from component to component. So in React, a parent component, such as like App Jsx, can pass data to a child component, such as the to-do, right? The to-do component we created. Generally, this data is passed through using props. But a child component can only pass data to a parent component if the parent component defines some way for it to pass up, which is usually done through state. So we can pass a state setter basically as a property through our child component, and then it can use that in order to set the state in the parent component. That's one way to be able to communicate back up. Another way is to use providers, which we're going to look at a little bit tonight. And then there's also third-party state libraries such as Redux that help with unidirectional flow. But we're not going to learn about Redux in this class. So, to do. So if you look at this particular thing, as you can see, this is importing some modules, right? And they're getting put into to-do. And we've set a state variable here for to-dos and set to-dos. And then we want to take those two pieces and pass them down to our child component add. And the reason we want to do that is so that when a to-do gets added, it can actually add that to the list for the parent. And why do we want that functionality? Well, the biggest reason is because to-dos is not just being used by the child component add, it's also getting used by the child component list. So that's the thing, these two sibling components have no way of communicating with each other whatsoever. There's nothing that they can use unless you get into providers. There's nothing they can use in order to communicate back and forth so that each one has the data that they require. So instead, what we do by setting this state variable inside our to-do parent, we can use the setter, the set to-dos, and pass it down to these two children. And then as they affect that list, each child component will be updated with the updated values. So that's kind of, it takes a little bit to get used to having to remember that all of your data has to flow down, meaning that you have to make sure that the parent is passing off setter methods to the children if you want to be able to affect data and access data between siblings. You got to definitely kind of remember that, and that does take a bit to wrap your brain around, and I don't expect you to know it like inside and out by the end of class today kind of thing. You'll learn this over this week and next week, and then when you guys start to work on your project, you'll definitely encounter it as well. Speaking of the project is not published up yet. I will publish it for tomorrow. I ran out of a bit of time. We had an emergency over the weekend. So I will get the project up. Usually I don't use the project I did in the semester before, and this time I explicitly can't because that one was this big monolithic project that included React and the Node backend, and it just turned into a problem. A bunch of people didn't have it done by the end of the semester and almost lost out on 40%. So I don't want to have that issue this time, so I figure we'll do it in chunks. You'll do the first part, and then you'll do the second part. So anyways, I'll have that up tomorrow, and I'll put out an announcement for it. After work, though. I'm done work at 5, so it'll be after 5. Yeah, so adding parental state to a to-do component, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where we take these state setter and the state variable, and we pass it down to our child components. That's what is happening there. Yeah, that's basically it. So we're going to see an example of unidirectional flow tonight anyways. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now. If you have anything that you want to know, preferably related to React. Doesn't have to be, but preferably. All right. This is one of the first times that we've had starter files in this class. Usually I do starter files through Git, and then we fork them and pull them down. I don't know why I didn't do it that way. I just didn't want to do it that way. I figured we'll just do starter files. I think the reason was because last semester when I did it that way, it was quite a bit of a headache, and we didn't wind up getting started for 30 minutes, and I don't want to have that happen this week. So we'll just pull the starter files down. I think if you just click the link, you have to actually go to it and click download. So you got to click download. That's obviously going to go into your downloads directory. Shouldn't be big, nice and small, only 206 kilobytes. After that happens, go ahead and choose to show in folder or whatever operating system you're using, how you can actually access this directory. There's your starter files. You can right click and choose to extract all. I'm just going to extract them into a folder called starter files. And you'll notice that this is kind of a stupid thing that happens with Windows, where when you zip folders, it puts the folder within a folder kind of thing. It's kind of annoying. So it will put you into the starter files folder, but you'll see here I have downloads, starter files. So it's two starter files within each other. So we only want this level of the directory, just the top level. So I'm going to copy it. I'm just hitting Control-C. And then I'm going to go find my live lessons, which I always forget where they are located. Oh, wrong class. Let's try the correct class. There we go. And I'm going to paste that folder into there. So all I've done so far is download, extract, grab the inside folder inside the zip, copied it, and pasted it into my live lessons. I'm going to rename it. So I'm going to click once and then just click slowly again and change it to lesson 4. And as I said last week, this is the week that I'm going to start using git bash as opposed to using PowerShell, just because I prefer it and it's a little quicker for me. The commands are the same though, there's no difference in the commands we're going to use. Alright, I just want to dock my browser over to the left-hand side. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. I'm going to go into the lesson 4 folder. I'm going to right-click and choose to open up with code. So that opens my code editor, and I'm in that directory. I think I actually need to zoom in one more. There we go. And then I'm going to go back to this directory, right-click, and choose git bash here. So if you have git bash, you can just follow along with your git bash. That also works. But I'm going to use git bash. And I'm going to dock it over to the side as well. And just shrink it down because it doesn't need to be so big. Cool. All right, everybody still with me? Anybody lost? No? Awesome. Okay, so when we pull down a project, either from Git or from another person, the one thing you'll notice, there's one thing that's missing. Does anybody know what folder is currently missing inside this project? Separately on CD into the folder yet? Did you right click on the folder path? Node modules. Yes, that's correct. Node modules is currently missing. Now that's crazy. I just got all of that chat all at once, which means my internet likely crapped out for 1 second. There we go. Yes, the node modules is the folder that is missing. So when we go to publish our Git, our code into our repository, we don't want to publish the node modules folder because it tends to be full of a whole bunch of stuff, and we don't necessarily want to put all that stuff in our repository, especially when we can just re-download it quite easily. So what command would I execute so that I can install all the node modules? Nobody wants to guess? So if we were using npm, it would be npm install, but instead we've been using yarn. So we're just going to run yarn. And that's going to go through and install all the modules for our project. And then we should see a node modules folder pop up in here once it's done. Oh, it's installing CodeMirror, which I thought I had removed, but I guess I did not. I did remove CodeMirror. Why is it installing CodeMirror? That's super weird. Oh no, I didn't. There it is. React CodeMirror. That's why. Cool. So once that's done, you should have your node modules and you will have your source folder with your stuff in it. So just while you guys are running through your install, I'm just going to show you a couple of things. We have an index file here. This index file we're not going to use tonight. It doesn't look really that much different than the index files you guys have been used to. I have changed the query selector that's usually here, because usually it's get element by ID. I prefer query selector. Really doesn't make a difference either way, but I must have changed it in my example last semester. So that's the way it is now. In App Jsx, you're going to see that we're missing some pieces here, and that is fine. We're going to fill in that stuff tonight. Other than that, we have a components directory, and this is where the rest of our code is going to go inside these components. Now, I have updated this lesson. It used to be super subatomic. Now it's not subatomic. It's just atomic. So basically the same kind of stuff that we did last week. I didn't want to overwhelm you with new things this week. Let me just open up my lesson plan for this, just so I don't forget what I've done here. There we go. Not that I don't mind going off the cuff, just sometimes it doesn't always work out the way I want it to. That's the only problem. All right, so tonight we're going to take a look at two fundamental ideas inside React. One is called React Router, and that's our way of being able to navigate around our React application from component to component. And then the second thing we're going to look at is React hooks. Now, it is potential that this class might only be maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours tonight, if we're lucky. If not, then, you know, it is as it is. If it ends earlier, though, I will stick around for a little while, and we can, you know, either help you with any code issues you might be having in your lab, or answer any questions that you guys might have. So that's always an option as well. But I always say that, and then it never works out, so it doesn't matter. Don't get your hopes up. All right. Introducing React Router. So React, by default, is known as an SPA, which stands for Single Page Application. So that means that all the logic, your content, your data, everything that's needed for your application is loaded at runtime into your browser from a vanilla React application. Okay, so let me clarify. That's on a vanilla React application. There are definitely efficiencies regarding that, right? And sometimes people will disagree that React is an optimal choice when it comes to large-scale applications. But I can tell you that from running 6 brands at Lab Media Group that are all built in React and Express, it is not impossible at all. It is not impossible. And there are ways to make that more optimal and more efficient. So style components, for example, delay loading CSS till absolute necessary. We're not going to learn about style components in this course, but style components are a cool module that you can add to React that will help kind of delay when CSS is loaded. There's also hundreds of lazy loading modules that you can use that lazy load not only images, but also will help to lazy load JavaScript and any other dependencies that you have. There's code splitting, which basically means that only the components that are currently in visual range get loaded, otherwise the rest remain offloaded. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's definitely ways to be able to improve the efficiency of your React application. I would say that if you are building a large application or a large scale application and it's from scratch, you should definitely consider looking at React as an option for your front end. Exposure for your view, right? And then as for your backend, look at something like Node and Express, or getting into something like AWS serverless or any cloud microservice architecture. Because at the end of the day, JavaScript is cheap to scale. It's also cheaper to find developers in JavaScript because there's so many of them. But yeah, it tends to be a better stack to use, I would say, nowadays than working in PHP, for example, right? For newer applications. So SPAs, websites can tend to be monolithic scroll due to massive amounts of content being on one page. The first SPA that I ever built was my own personal portfolio, and this was my first time ever touching React. I had never touched React before. And so I built this wonderful portfolio, and it is I wouldn't say it's a monolithic scroll, but if you start opening up these things, it becomes pretty monolithic because, I mean, there's so much stuff. By the way, don't build your portfolios like this. This is a terrible way to build a portfolio. It's way too much information. But yeah, now you can see this thing is ridiculous, right? And all this is on the page at the time of render. So everything is loaded at once, all the data sources there at once. So all these images, all the data feeding this stuff is from a JSON file. It's all there instantly as we load the page. And it becomes this monolithic scroll, so to speak, meaning that you have to scroll and scroll and scroll to get to different things. Or you have to come up with solutions, like I have up here, where you can click a link and it scrolls you to the location that you want to go to, in order to, I don't know, create a better user experience than one big monolithic scroll. That being said, though, there is a way around that in React so that you don't have these monolithic scrolls, that where when you click skills, it replaces the current component view that you're looking at with another view. And that's where React Router comes into play. So React Router acts like a standard router. And I know you guys have had MVC before, so you have had experience with routers before as well. Maybe not intrinsically, but we will talk about it pretty in depth. The whole idea of a router is to take the path that the user has requested in their address and then provide them some sort of functionality based on that path. So, for example, if they were to go /users, then likely you're going to retrieve the users list and then send it back to them as a view for them to be able to consume. Routers all work basically the same way. It doesn't really seem to matter what you're working with the routes in. So whether you're working in React, or whether you're working in Node, or whether you're working in ASP.NET, it doesn't really matter. All works functionally the same idea. It takes a look at the request that has been requested, which is the address that you have put inside your address bar, right? So for example, if I do SCM education here, and we'll just do this intro course here, you'll notice that this address is currently set up with my domain, right? There's my domain. Then there's this path, and then there's another piece to the path. This is a route. This is built in Ruby on Rails, but the concept is the same. This is a route, right? So this would be my resource that I want to access, for example, and this is the number of the ID of the resource that I want to access. So I want to access course lesson plans, and specifically the 16th course lesson plan, right? So that's, this particular path is a route. So what's happening in the back end is my server picks this up and says, oh, you're trying to match course lesson plans and you want the 16th one. So it fires this off to a router. The router interprets it and says, oh, for that path, you want to execute this functionality. So it says, okay, well then I'm going to send you off to the controller to have that executed. Now we're not going to use a controller inside our React application because that's MVC. We will when we deal with Node. But in React, it's still functionally the same way. So essentially React is going to pay attention to our path, and then using that path, it's going to execute the correct component. It's actually going to unhide the component because the components remain hidden until it reveals them, and then you can see those components. So we're going to work with React Router. Now I've already installed React Router for you. It's right here, React Router DOM. Normally you would install this yourself using yarn. You would do yarn add React Router DOM, and that would install React Router for you. React Router is not native to React. It's not a part of the React package. It's not even a part of the Create React package. It is something that you have to add on afterwards. If you're using an application like Next.js, it does come with its own capability for routing, so you don't necessarily need to do that. But React, we have to give it the functionality. So in order to add the React Router to, or implement it into our application, we need to, first of all, open up my notes so I can see what I'm doing. We need to actually import it and wrap things. So now React Router DOM is known as something called a provider. So essentially what it does is it wraps our application, allowing our application to be able to access the functionality of the React Router DOM from anywhere within the application. In order for us to be able to use that functionality, if we go to our App Jsx file, so open up your app.jsx, the first thing we're going to need to do is make sure that we've imported the browser router from the React Router DOM. This will be our provider. This is going to give us the provision that we need in order to provide the functionality of the browser router to our application. Then within our app, our top level parent element is going to be browser router. So you'll notice you don't have to code anything because I stupidly forgot to remove it. But yeah, that's what we're using. This is all coming from React Router DOM. So this provider, like I said, it's going to provide functionality down through the children that it has itself wrapped around. And we're going to provide it some children. But there's a few things we need. One, we need a route list. So basically a list of routes that we have defined that this path will execute, or reveal this component. And then we need a link list, which is basically just a menu, right? A navigatable menu that says, hey, this link points to this path. And then basically what happens is when you click the link inside your browser, it executes the route that has been defined. So let's define the route first. So we're going to go to Components, Shared, and open up router.jsx. And this is where we're going to build our router component. So we're under Source, Components, Shared, router.jsx. I'll copy the path, and then you can see where we are. Should have copied the relative path. I had to remove a whole bunch of stuff. Whoops, clicked on the wrong thing. Sorry about that. All right, so just like any component we're going to set up, it's going to have the same 4 pieces that every component would have. So import React from React, right? Let's give our component a name. So our file is called router, so we're going to name our component router. And again, you don't have to do that. It's just common convention. And then we're going to export our default router. And we need a return statement in here. So hopefully this is becoming second nature. All right, so there's a few things we need from React Router DOM in order to build a router. One, we need a switch. So we're going to import the switch. And the switch module is called switch. So we're going to actually destructure it from React Router DOM, like so. And in between these curly braces, we will call switch, like so. Now inside our return statement, we can go ahead and add the switch just like we would with any component, like so. And that will execute the switch function. So the switch works like any switch. Like any switch in any programming language, it's the same idea. You give it a case statement, it reads the case statement, and then executes the code based on the case statement. This is kind of the approach that they've taken. It's an interesting approach, but it definitely works, and I think it's easy enough for most people that are beginning with React to understand. So think of it like a switch statement with case statements. However, instead of case, we're going to use route. So we're going to add another component. We're going to import route, and that's what we'll use inside our switch. So the way a route looks is you basically have a route that points to a path and then loads a specific component. So the route is like this, and we can make self-closing routes or you can make them open. It's up to you. The difference between a self-closing route and an open route is just really where you initialize the component, but we're going to initialize the component within a self-closing route just because I like the syntax. It's a little nicer. We need to set the case. Like, what case are we looking at? And the case is always reviewing our path. So we're always going to be checking the path, just like any router does, right? Routers always review the path. So we're going to look at the path and determine whether or not the path matches the path that the user has typed into the browser. If it does, then we'll execute the code in our component. Otherwise, we'll check the next route. And we'll keep doing that over and over again until we find the path that matches what the user is looking for. So in our route, we're going to add the word exact. That's important because otherwise it will match close to a component, and we don't want that. We want it to be exactly whatever the path definition is. And then we'll define our path. So our path will be, for the first one, will be state. Now we're going to need a component to point state to, so when the user has typed in /state inside the browser, or they've clicked a link that goes to /state, we want it to load a component. Right now it's not going to load anything because we haven't told it to. So to load the component specifically, we have to add another flag here, or another attribute I should say. Component. And then we have to tell it what the component is that we're going to load. So we're going to use curly braces here, and I'm going to try to see if I can get it to find it. No, it's not going to find it automatically. Sometimes it will find it automatically, sometimes it doesn't, but we're going to load state will be the name of the component. And then we'll need to import it. So we're going to import state from dot slash hooks slash state, like so. So just to walk you through what we've done so far, we have imported the switch module from the React Router DOM. Switch works just like a switch in any programming languages. It reviews the case and then executes the code based on the case. However, instead of cases, we're using routes, and we're matching the value of the path. That's how we're doing this. So if the path matches the path that's been defined in the browser inside the address bar, then we will execute whatever component we've told the route to execute. Make sense? Clear as mud? Let's do another one. So we are going to do effect this time. So it's route exact path equals effect component equals effect, and we self-close it. And then we got to make sure we import effect from our hooks slash effect. And we have 3 more to go. So what we can do to cheat a little is we can hold down, click next to this thing, hold Alt-Shift and press down. That will duplicate the line, and then we just have to change it to the thing we want to change it to, which this time is going to be ref. And there we go, ref. And then obviously we need to import it, so I'm going to Alt-Shift down. This time when I double-click it, it's going to highlight it. I'm just going to hit Control-D to select the other one and type in ref. You have to be careful with Control-D though, because unless you turn on case sensitivity, which you have to kind of do through the find menu, it will select lowercase as well, and then you'll wind up overwriting lowercase letters, which you don't want to do. Let's do Alt-Shift down again, and this time we are going to define the path of Memo and the component of Memo. And again, we need to import it. And then the last one we're going to do is context. I will try to copy and paste this into the thing. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it cuts it off and truncates it, which can be kind of annoying. And it looks like it imported the whole thing. It looks like it didn't truncate it. So this is our router. This has given us the capability to be able to hide and show our components based on the route that the user has put into their browser, right? So they type in their path or they click a link. It will match these route paths, right? So for example, if they go to /state, it's going to match this path, which is then going to reveal this component, the state component. So it'll replace the current view you see in the browser with that component. Now you can think of this like navigating by clicking hyperlinks, right, and navigating through your website. But the difference is that these components are all sitting there. They're already initialized and mounted inside your application. And when you click the link, it then reveals them so that you can see them, but the data's there. It's just hidden. It just auto hides it for you. All right, is anybody still typing, or am I good to move on? So we need to add our router to our App Jsx. So if we open up App Jsx, we are going to import our router. So we'll import router from components, shared router. And then once we've imported that, we can go ahead and add that into our DOM here. And it's self-closing. We don't need it to do anything funny. So there we go. Browser router is going to pick up these routes, right? Because it's probably going to evaluate the children. It's going to pick up these routes, and then it knows what components to load when the user clicks a link, right? Or types in the path/state. Browser router is the thing that's actually doing the listening and the parsing of those paths. Cool. So we imported router and we just initialized it in our browser router parent here. Nothing too fancy yet. We're getting to fancy. Cool. So our next step is going to be the navigation. This is where we're going to define the links that are basically going to toggle those routes for us. And this is just easier than having people type in paths. Just makes sense to have the link in place. So we're going to open up shared navigation.jsx. And I've already typed out the UL for you to create the menu item. We just need to actually add in the links. So the first thing we're going to do is import the link module from React Router DOM. So I'm going to import link from React Router DOM. And this is kind of like, it just creates anchor tags, essentially. It creates anchor tags, and then when you click them, it triggers the router DOM to do its path read. So in our first LI, we'll create the state link, or we'll actually create a home link. That makes the most amount of sense. Let's go link, like so. And then in the middle between the two opening and closing link tags, you just type the name of the link. So that's what our label will be. So just like an anchor tag, imagine these just said A on them. Then that would be just the same as an anchor tag. We're going to give it a class name of nav-link. Make sure you do the dash though, or it won't show up properly. And then we need to tell it where to point to. And you might be like, oh, I'm going to just type href, but that's not what it uses. It uses to. And then the path that we want to link to. So we're just going to link to home. And once you've done that once, we can go ahead and do it again. We're just going to paste it in place because I just copied it. I'm going to change this from to /state, and then change it from home to state. might copy this one just because I can then just double click the word state to change it, which I like. So I'm going to paste it in place, double click state, and change it to effect with lowercase letters, and then the uppercase one change to effect with an uppercase E. I'm going to paste again. Change this one over to, I think I'm on reference. Yes, ref. Ref. And ref. And then this one from state to memo. And memo. And then the last one will be, oops, context. And that's all of them. So once again, all Link is going to do is provide us with a path to our route, right? So when we click these path links, then that will toggle our expected component. However, you can just type in /state and /effect and /memo, and it will load the correct component. However, it completes a full request. This continues with soft requests, which means that instead of the page reloading, it's just literally creating the soft request and toggling the state thing. It's just this. I'll copy and paste it for you, Ryan. Yep, no problem. So we've got our import statement that imports the link library, or link module, and then we have our links for home, which is just /state, which is /state, /effect, /reference, /memo. Once we have those in, we're ready to add the navigation to our router so that all of these will get loaded as well. I don't remember if it matters if it comes before router or not. I don't think it does. It doesn't make sense that it would, because it is a provider, so it shouldn't care. So if we go to App Jsx, we can go ahead and import navigation from our shared components. Oops. There we go. And then add in the component. Like so. And then that is App Jsx done. Like, we're not going to be in App Jsx again after this point. Everything else we're going to do tonight will just be with the hooks. And we'll do that after our break, likely. We should make sure that this is all loading. Likely there's going to be 100,000 errors because I did pull a whole bunch of stuff out, so things will be broken. But we should give it a go and do a yarn start anyways. So I'm just going to toggle my other browser window. There we go. And then I'm going to do yarn start and hit enter. And that's going to boot up my React application. And like I said, it's likely broken. Oh, no, it's not broken. But you're not going to see much. Oh, yeah, you will. Actually, you can see it. As you toggle through the things, you can see the various components loading. And the important thing to note, if I hit F12 on my keyboard here and go to my network tab, our network tab will actually show us things that are loading, right? So if I load my page for the first time, so I'm going to hit refresh, you'll notice that something has happened, right? Something has loaded. I'm just going to collapse this. We can see that the state has loaded here. I think if I put on XHR, it's a little better. Yeah, okay, so we're in the state. I'm going to go home. Let's see here. All right, so what I want you to pay attention to is at the bottom here, we shouldn't see, actually I'll clear it, we shouldn't see any more requests. So I'm going to click on state, no request, effect, no request, reference, no request, memo, and context. And you may be like, well, okay, what's that mean? Well, what it means is that we're not creating a hard request through our browser for content. Our content is already there. We already have our content. So when we're clicking these, all it's really doing is hiding and showing things. That's it. Notice that our menu is in a weird spot. In our code for App Jsx, if you click on the navigation and hold Alt beside and press up, and then save that, now it should be, yeah, there we go. Now it's always at the top. So the order does matter, which actually makes perfect sense now that I think of it. All right, so I think that's a good place to stop for a little bit, have a 10-minute break, and then when we come back, we'll take a look at React hooks, and then once we're done React hooks, we'll call it a night. Now, React hooks does take a little bit to get through. Not so much it's not so much the issues with the hooks part, it's the provider. The provider is the one that's the most confusing. But we definitely should take a look at providers. Though I am debating on whether or not we're going to learn about them in our authentication module. I think we will. All right, cool. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Just let me know. Or if you need me to put the code back up for any specific page. No? All good? Cool. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 4 o'clock. All right. There we are. I think I already told you guys, if you ever see me forget to unpause, make sure you remind me. I do have a backup, but the backup's annoying because I don't pause between the breaks, so you wind up with all the break time as well, which is, kind of annoying. Okay, cool. So we are going to, so that was React Router, right? And the whole purpose of React Router is to be able to hide show our components as we need to, which is a common thing that you'll probably want to do. It's very unlikely that you want a monolithic scroll. You'll likely want to hide and show things as necessary. And React Router gives you that ability to do it. That being said, Next.js also supports that out of the box. So if you ever wanted to pick up a stack that's worth learning, Next.js is definitely worth learning. Especially if you're already familiar with React already and you're coming into this class and you're like, I already know React. Feel free to pick up Next.js, and if you want to do your projects and labs in Next.js, I'm okay with that. I have no problem marking that as I work with Next.js in my day job anyways. Cool. Yeah, so we are done with these files, so let's go ahead and close them off. And we are going to talk about React hooks. Let me pull my page over here so you can see what I'm looking at. Introducing React hooks, specifically fundamental React hooks. So these are the most common React hooks that you're going to work with. And these include useState, which we've already used at this point, but also something else known as useEffect, useReference, and useMemo. And they are very, very handy for us. Now, what is a hook? Well, a hook allows us to be able to tap into certain parts of the React lifecycle. When we create a component, our component has different points of its lifecycle that we may need to access. So those different points, and you can think of this just like when you're working with like a class-based language, right? There's the instantiation point where the class becomes into existence as an object. There's the constructor point, right, where you're actually constructing it. There's the destruction point where you're removing it, right? Those different points or life cycles of your class. React works kind of similarly, where you have your constructor. Actually, you have the initialization point where the thing has just been all of a sudden there. They know it exists. It hasn't actually come into existence yet, but they know that of its existence. And then you have the constructor part where it actually gets constructed and becomes an actual entity. And then you have the rendering point where it's going through its render process and it's actually now visible on the screen. And then you have it's done rendering and it's ready to go. So that's the component did mount point. There are different points through this cycle that you may want to tap into. Like, you may want to do things like retrieve data before the thing even starts its mounting point. Or you may want to access the DOM, and if that's the case, you want to make sure that it has mounted before you start to access the DOM, because it won't be available to you otherwise. There's also the updating life cycle. So that's when whenever we make a change in data, our component will actually change. It will actually re-render. So for example, whenever we modify state or a prop, those are the two key things. Whenever a state changes or a prop changes that a component relies on, it forces the whole component to re-render. So that can get costly, and there are ways to tap into that life cycle to avoid it from re-rendering and stop it from making costly recalculations. And then we have unmounting, and unmounting is when the component disappears. So you can kind of think of that like your destructor. One second, I need to turn on my light. It's getting dark in here. Your destructor, and your destructor would be the code that executes when the component disappears, right? So when it unmounts and it's done and it's no longer in existence, you can actually execute code at that particular point. Now these are using terminologies that are used with class-based components in React. We're not using class-based components in this class. We're using hook-based components or functional components. So these terminologies are a little bit weird, but the concept's still pretty much the same. All right. Let me just put that over there. So the important concept in React to take away from all of this is that update function, because the update can cause a lot of, oddities, I guess, with your React application. It can cause things to not work quite as properly as you want them to. Mostly because maybe you're doing heavy calculations, and then every single time the component has to update, it does the heavy calculation again, or maybe you have memory leaks. Just different things that you can have happen during that component update that can cause some problems. So hooks are a way for us to help avoid that, because we can use hooks at different points to help deal with large computational components, to deal with state, to deal with references, and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to look at now. The first one we're going to talk about is state. We have used state once already. You used it in your lab, as well as you used it with last week when we built our component for the to-do. We're going to look at state a little bit more in depth. So the useState React hook allows us to set a variable that will maintain its value and reference between component updates. So you can think of a component update kind of like you were refreshing the page, right? So imagine being in your browser and you refresh your page. For those of you that understand how that works, the browser is stateless. And because the browser is stateless, you can wind up with things like code changes and stuff that you've made that don't actually adhere, right? Because the browser is stateless, so of course it's not going to adhere. There's also the fact that because the browser is stateless, design changes, style changes won't stay or stick around, and that makes sense because, again, the browser is stateless. So with React, it's kind of the same idea. They mimic that a bit. As the components update, anything that isn't set in a state variable automatically is reinitialized and recreated. So if you make a color change on your page and then the component updates, you'll lose that color change if it's not being tracked somewhere like in a state variable. So state variables are super important, and you're going to write a ton of them because you're going to need them all the time. And generally the way they work is you use the useState function, right? And the useState function will return an array of two values. And those two values are the initial variable, so whatever value the initial variable starts with, and a setter function that you can use to be able to set that value at any other point through your application. So what I would like you to do is, if you go to the hooks directory, you will see a state.jsx file in there. Go ahead and open that up. Make sure that your application is running in Git Bash, because we want to see the changes as we're going through our application. Right now it looks pretty thin. There's not very much going on inside there. We have two buttons, so make sure you're on state here. We have two buttons. We have a plus sign and a minus sign that currently do nothing. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that when we click the plus sign, a number will appear in the middle here and it will increment. And then as we click the minus sign, the button will cause it to decrement, right? So we're going to create an increment and a decrement functionality. So in order to do that, we need to be able to keep track of state, because when we click the plus sign, the button will increment, but it will also cause the whole thing to re-render. Every time we change that value, the whole thing is going to re-render, which means if we didn't store it in a state variable, we would lose the value each time, and we don't want that to happen. When we're setting use hooks or any type of hooks, we always define the hook inside of our component function. So this is our whole component function. I'll collapse it so you can see. This is our component function. We need to make sure that we're using the hooks inside the component function, that we initialize them in there. So the first thing we need to do is actually import the useState module. So I'm importing the useState module. The next thing I'm going to do is create a state variable and a state setter. So I'm going to say const, and I'm going to destructure the values that useState sends back, because it sends them back as an array. I can destructure them into an array of variables. And generally the common convention is to name the variable for the value, and then the variable for the setter to be the same as the variable for the value, but with the word set in front of it. So you have count and set count, for example. And then we're going to make that equal to useState, and we're going to give it an initial value to start with, and I'm just going to get it to start with 0. Now, right out of the box, even though I don't have any functionality created here, I can go ahead and use this state variable right now. So I'm going to do that. On line 12 here, where I have my button, the one that's currently disabled, so it's the middle button, I'm going to add a set of curly braces, which allows us to execute JavaScript notation, and I'm going to put count in the middle there, and save. And if you did it correctly, you should see a 0. So the plus sign, minus sign, and a 0 in the middle. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what's happening here. There we go. Now, obviously, these buttons don't do anything yet. I want them to do something. I want them to increment and decrement. And we can write this in a very complicated fashion, or we can make them nice and simple using arrow functions. So I'm going to do it with arrow functions because I love them. I'm going to create a variable called increment, and I'm going to make it equal to a function definition. If you remember from lesson 1, arrow functions will explicitly return if you don't create curly braces and you only give them a one-line expression. We only need a one-line expression. We just need set count, and then I need to reference the existing count value and add 1 to it. Now, a lot of people are going to make the mistake by doing set count plus plus, but that won't work because all it will do is add 1 to 0 and then set it, and it's just going to keep doing that over and over again, and it won't actually work the way you think it is. At least I don't think it will. I tried it and I'm pretty sure it didn't work. I'm pretty sure it caused a problem. Yeah, it doesn't work. You have to do plus 1. There we go. Oh, right, we haven't actually attached it to anything yet. Why don't we attach it and then try it? So we need to attach the increment function. We're just going to attach it to the onClick event of the button. So I'm going to come down here to the first button, do onClick equals, like so, and put increment in here. So when the button is clicked, it will cause it to increment. Now I will try plus plus, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, no, yep. Assignment to constant variable. That's why, because we're actually trying to reassign the value, and we can't do that because it's a constant. And you shouldn't do that anyways. You should be using the set count. So now it works. Yay, us. So let's write the decrement function, and this time I'm going to let you guys write the decrement function. Go ahead and write the decrement function, and then once you've written it, paste it into the chat channel so I can see how you did. Looks good to me, John. That works for me. Const decrement set count minus 1. And then, of course, in our button down here, we're going to want to add an on-click event and add decrement to it. So somebody last week asked me for my theme, and I did post a video under resources on how to install the Synthwave theme with the glow functionality. So whoever that was, it should be there. I can't remember who it was, or even if it was this class. So now you have plus and minus. So now you can decrement and increment. Yeah, yes. All right, so here we're setting the state variable count to an initial value of 0, right? We've got count, we've set it to 0, and we're using it right here. So when we first initialize our page, so let me jump to effect and state. Here you go, you can see that we've initialized it to 0. Notice that we're overwriting the value in count. That is because the state variables are to remain immutable. So when we do these set count, we're overwriting the value in here. We're replacing whatever value is currently in there with the new value. Can we call set count directly instead of via increment or decrement? You can. The only thing is, though, is you still have to use the arrow function. So you could just take this expression and replace increment with that expression. That would entirely work, Leo. But you have to do it with this arrow function, because if you do set count directly, it does cause a problem. I can't remember what the reasoning is. I forget what it is, but you can't do it. It won't let you. Right, so then the reason why we're using set count is because you can't define count directly, so you can't just go count plus 1. Not even just because it's a constant, but because you shouldn't be modifying it that way anyways. It will throw warnings and scream at you and yell at you if you try. Alright, cool. So if you need to change the value, you must use the state setter function. So this is our state setter function. And let it overwrite the existing value entirely. There are many ways to get the current value and use it in your assignment, just as we've done above with count plus 1. The on-click event for both buttons is assign their respective function of increment and decrement, right? And the count state variable is referenced within our middle button, which is its current value. So that's use state in a nutshell. Any questions about use state? No? Alrighty. Next one is effect. Woo! 1 down, 4 to go, 3 to go, 4 to go. Effect. Alright, so what is effect? The use effect state is our gateway into our rendered component. So now we're tapping in to when the component has actually mounted to the page. The user can visually see it. So the cool thing about use effect is we need it if we want to tap into the virtual DOM, because up to the point where the component is mounting, the DOM is inaccessible. You can't access the DOM. So you couldn't grab different elements of the DOM because it would not be available to you. You need to do that once it has actually loaded. So in addition, many of the browser APIs will not be available to the DOM until the DOM is fully rendered. So if you can think about all the different APIs that are available, like fetch, right? No fetch available till the DOM is loaded. What else? Math wouldn't be available to you till the DOM is loaded. There's a bunch, and my brain is like completely gone. Local storage, that's a big one, because I like to write to local storage sometimes when I'm in React, and just for like caching and stuff, and nope, not available to you. Cookies aren't available to you. Session storage is not available to you. There's a whole bunch of them. You have to wait till the DOM is loaded, and the easiest way to tap into that point is when use effect comes into play. So when use effect loads, that's when the DOM has actually finished rendering, and we can actually access the DOM and anything that is currently available inside of it. So to add use effect, the first thing we need to do is import it. So right next to our use state, we will import use effect. And you'll notice that this function that we've got here is just the one that we basically wrote last time, right? It's the function that we just finished writing. So now we're going to write a little function that's basically going to allow it to modify the background color. However, we can't just modify the background color here right now because when this loads, the DOM is not available to us. So like for example, if I try to run console.log document here inside my element and I hit function F12 and jump over to the console. Hello console. There we go. Yeah, I know. So let's just refresh. So it did grab the document. That's weird. Shouldn't have grabbed the document yet. The document shouldn't even be loaded. .style, .background. Let's see if all of that is available right now. We'll jump to state and back to effect. Now you see it's empty. It's empty. And the reason is because it doesn't have access to anything that's currently in there yet. So let's go ahead and use effect and modify that DOM. Whoops. So use effect looks like this. It's use effect, and it takes two arguments. It takes a function as an argument, and then you can also provide it a list of listeners. So things for it to pay attention to and be aware of. We don't need the list of listeners because we're not going to be modifying anything like that. So we're going to use effect like so. Oh, that's not true. Actually, we do need a list of listeners. We need to add count in here. That's going to be our listeners. So I will copy and paste this just because a lot of people don't like to write all this out. So we're going to create a hue based on the temperature. So it's 240 multiplied by 30 minus count divided by 60. That will generate a heat for us. Then we're going to use document.body.style.background and make it equal. We're going to use a string template here for this to HSL, which is highlight, saturation, and illumination. No, it's hue, saturation, and illumination. And we're going to put in there $hue, and we'll set it to 100% and $count %. Not sure why we're doing that, but we are. And then document.body.style.transition, only because I like animations, to 0.2s. So I will copy and paste that for you. And if you did it correctly, it should be black right now. It should have just changed to black. But as you click the plus sign, you'll notice it gets lighter. It's getting hotter. And you can bring it back down again in color as well. So use effect happens once the element has mounted. So once it's mounted and the DOM is loaded, we are able to access the DOM from within use effect. Otherwise, the DOM is virtually unattainable. There's no guarantee that once you go to access the DOM that it's even loaded. So this is the only way to do that. We generally use effect in a bit of a different way. So we usually, this is kind of a weird way to use it, but I have used it like this before. If I needed to change the title of a page, I might use effect this way. However, I generally use it for API-driven requests. So if I'm trying to reach an API endpoint and I need to pull data back and then load it into my DOM, obviously I need to make sure my DOM is loaded, because if it isn't, then there's no point, right? Because I can't put the data anywhere where I need to put it. So I load the DOM, and then in use effect, I do an Axios request to an endpoint, grab my data, and then load it into my DOM. Any questions about use effect? We're going to use it quite a bit next week because we're going to be working with data and data APIs. So we're going to use it tons. No? Cool. We're going to take a look at the use reference hook, which allows us to maintain a reference to a mutable object at all times. So it's most commonly it's used with components to maintain a reference to a particular DOM element on the page. So when we look at these things, right, these buttons are going to become DOM elements on the page, and we want to know when they're a DOM element that we can interact with them at that particular point. So like reference actually makes it easier to access the DOM element without having to search for it using DOM selectors. We can add a reference to this button and then just reference the reference in order to actually access it and work with it. So use reference is similar to use state in that it maintains the value it has upon every re-render. So on every update, you don't have to worry about it changing. The difference lies in, though, that it's directly mutable, so that you actually modify its value directly, as opposed to modifying it through a setter. So let's go ahead and open up reference. And there it is there for us. And we need to load in the other libraries we're missing. So we're going to load in use effect and use reference. So we're going to load in both of those because we're going to need both of them. We might as well change our page over to reference as well. Now, right now, this is not changing the hue of our page. So we're going to need to use the use effect as well so that it creates the hue, right? So I'm just going to go copy that from effect. I'm going to come into effect and copy the use effect from lines 10 to 14. Control C. And I'm just going to paste that in here. There we go. And that should work. Yep, works right out of the box. So now we're going to add a reference to the middle button. So we use the middle button to trigger an event that will cause the count to decrease, decrease, depending on the direction we scroll the mouse in. So we're basically going to come over top of the middle button. So you'll be able to increment this way, right, by clicking. Or you'll be able to come over top of the button and scroll up to increase or scroll down to increase, which is kind of cool. So the way we're going to do that is first we need to define a reference variable. So we're going to do const button L, like EL, equals use reference. So there we go. We have a reference variable. And then we need to attach our reference to our middle mouse button. Or to our middle button, not our middle mouse button, our middle button. So in line 6, we've used this reference. Make sure you've imported use reference and use effect up here in line 1. We've got our button L, and now we're going to add it to our middle button here. So I'm going to add a new attribute called reference, or ref, and I'm going to give it curly braces, and I'm going to put button L inside of it, like so. So now I've created a reference to button L and the use reference element. Oops, stop doing that. Now I can go ahead and access that in use effect. And I'm using it in use effect because I want to make sure this button is loaded in the DOM. But I don't know the button's name. I could always use CSS selectors to crawl through the DOM and grab that button, but I might wind up with something else. So this is a more direct way. So first of all, I reference my reference, so button L. Then I reference the property current. And what current is you can think of it like target, right? So you know when you access an element using the DOM selectors, you get the DOM element back and then you access target. Target is the thing that's being currently affected. Then I want to access the on wheel event, or sorry, it's all lowercase letters. I made that mistake before. And then I'm going to assign it a function, right? So that, like an event listener, essentially. So I'm going to give it E for event. And then I'm just going to do E.delta Y, because delta Y is actually the difference currently. If it's greater than 0, then I'm going to decrement my color. And I'm going to execute that. Otherwise, I'm going to increment my color. So it's quite a mouthful, actually, that function. Here, I'll copy and paste it for you. So now I can hit plus, I can hit minus, or I can put my mouse over top of it and scroll up. And eventually we just hit white. Or I can scroll down. And eventually it goes dark. Can I scroll up a tiny bit? Like the color? No, you don't mean the color. You mean this thing. More than that, Mitch, or is that good? Like, do you need the import statement? No worries. So use reference is handy when you're trying to deal with DOM elements, but not even necessarily DOM elements. When you want to access things after the DOM has loaded and you need a reference to that particular thing, sometimes that can be libraries as well. I've had to do it with CG Editor. I've had to use it with it. I've had to use it with, not Lighthouse, that one that's the graphing library. High charts. I've had to use it with high charts as well, in order to access them at the correct time period. All right. We kind of blew through those pretty quickly. Those are our fundamental hooks. Any questions about use state, use reference, or use effect? Yours didn't work. Why didn't it work? Is there any errors you're having, Aways?
Yeah, basically just saying his isn't working. It's not, something's not showing up, like the change color isn't showing up.
So in which particular one are we looking at? Under reference?
Yeah, the reference. The color didn't change under the reference.
When
we added the increment,
yep,
and it's supposed to change the colors. When I'm going up, it doesn't change.
So when you scroll, the color is not changing. Are the numbers changing?
So I click on the plus.
Yeah.
Sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry, Sean, I'm just trying to get him to explain it again. I'm not sure if it's the color that's not changing or the number that's not changing, but I think it's the color isn't changing.
Okay.
Something's working and something's not.
Gotcha. Okay.
Sorry.
If the scroll's not working, a ways you can replace your use effect with this function. Because it might be just something wrong with the way the function's been written. That's all.
No, it's not that part. Sorry, the color's working. It's the plus symbol. The numbers are not changing, so the numbers aren't going up.
Make sure that under your...
He has to click it many times, so he's having to click it every time to get an increment. Is that what he's supposed to be doing?
Yeah, you have to click it multiple times. However, if he brings his mouse over top of the numbers and scrolls with his middle mouse button, it should scroll through, if he has a middle mouse button. I didn't think of that. Some of you guys are probably using trackpads, so I'm not sure how you simulate a middle mouse button on a trackpad.
Just give me a second, Sean. He's just looking at his other screen. So he's got a mouse with the scroll button. I'm just going to ask him again if he puts it over the numbers, if it works.
Yeah.
Just have to get his attention in. Yeah, he's saying the scroll doesn't work even though he's got a mouse with a scroll on it.
Okay. One other question is, does he have the button L defined on line 6 with use reference?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, got
down
that.
here on the middle line, so line 24, does he have the property set as reference equals curly brace button L curly brace? Oops.
Just checking that. Yes, he's got that as well.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, we can look at it at the break, I guess. If he's
Okay,
got all the
so-
code I've got, it should work. It might just be something up with his mouse button. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing is, too, is Waze, are you using a Windows machine or a Mac? I can't remember.
He's using a Mac.
A Mac. And are you using Safari, Chrome, or Firefox?
Chrome.
Chrome. Okay, well, it should work because technically the API is the same. Because sometimes the APIs for these events can be different depending on the browser. It can also be different based on the operating system too, so that could be the issue. Does anybody else have a Mac? Were they able to get the scroll to work for theirs? I think somebody else in this class has a Mac. Oh, you're in Windows at the moment, Leah? Yeah, I think it was you that had the Mac the last time. Alright, like I said, we can take a look at the break. Okay, let's talk about Memo. So open up Memo.jsx. So the use Memo hook allows you to cache calculations between updates. And don't confuse this with React Memo, because if you go searching for Memo, you're likely going to find React Memo. React Memo is slightly different. React Memo allows you to create basically, it's like a static component, essentially. So what happens is the component renders, and then it stays that way. If nothing changes within the component, it will just not re-render. It will just stay the way it is. Use Memo kind of works the same way, except for it's your way of being able to cache a calculation, right? So something that might take a long time to process, maybe it's a really lengthy API call, or maybe it's taking data back and then processing all that data and it just takes so long, you might want to cache that calculation. Now, keeping in mind that this is one of those times where you have to kind of consider whether caching it on the front makes sense or whether you should be caching it in the back and then delivering the value. I'm going to tell you right now, 99.9% of the time, if you're doing a large calculation, you should be doing it on the server and then passing the served result to the front, to the client. Don't make the client wait around. You want the client to be quick and fast, and big calculations shouldn't be happening on the client. They should be done on the server. However, say it's not your code base. Say you're dealing with something like that where you actually need to do the calculation now on the front and you don't have control over the server, then use Memo can definitely be something that can help speed up your application. So the first thing we need to do is actually import use Memo. So let's import it and also change our thing over to use Memo. I'm going to refresh because if I refresh, then the browser goes white. It makes it a little bit easier to see the number. So we've imported use Memo. And you'll notice that we have a button here that says set count on it, and it adds 1 to count, right? We're going to create a function that is a long calculating function. Now the thing is I know I've told you guys before to use memos, or sorry, to use the hooks inside the function, like inside the component, and that's not wrong. You do want to do that. But your long computed calculation should be done outside, right? So you want it done externally to the component. So we're going to create a long computational calculation. There we go. And we'll add a little console log in here. Console log calculating calculating. There we go. And we'll say let final equals 0. And then for let I equal min, so whatever min is, I is less than or equals, all right, less than or equal to max, then I plus plus. Very simple for loop. You probably haven't seen it without curly braces though, but you can do this kind of stuff. There we go. And then return final. Now it doesn't look like a long computational thing, but it's going to be a long computational thing. So first we're going to do it without using Memo so you can see what happens. And a good idea is to open up your console window so that you can kind of get an idea what's going on here. I'm just going to clear this. This will also kind of show you how the component constantly renders. We should see this calculating like multiple times. So in our div, we're going to perform the calculation, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to use a set of curly braces, and we're going to execute our calculation. And I'm going to make it to 100. Let's just do it to 1 million or so. Is that 1 million? That's 10 million. 10 million works. Yeah, I'm going to make it up to 10 million. And I'm going to save that. So it calculated it, but notice now that when I click the button and I change this number, see how it calculates again. So this number, this process to calculate this number is going to happen every time I click the button. So I'm doing this long calculation so far 40 plus times, which is super costly. Careful making this number too big, you can crash your browser. I don't know how much system memory you have, but you can reach the max and wind up crashing your browser. So the way to stop this so that it doesn't calculate every single time that I make a change within my state, right? Because every time this state changes, it causes this whole thing to re-render. What I need to do is store the initial value for this and then not change it. So the way to do that is we're going to use the use memo, which needs to be defined inside here. So we're going to do const long calc equals use memo, and just like use effect, it takes a function call. So I'm going to say use effect compute long calc 0 10 million. I'm going cross-eyed here and I can't see how many values I'm typing in, and then comma an empty set. So in here, if you put count in here, I think it will wind up updating on every count. We can test that though to see, and then we just need to replace this value here with long calc, and it will execute that function each time. So now when I click, I'm going to get calculating the first time, but I won't get it repeating calculating. So notice that it doesn't keep calling calculating. It only does it the first time it renders the component. Now I am curious, if I put count in here, I think that will actually cause it to listen to count, which means, yeah, that's exactly what happens. So that will now be its trigger. So you can actually use this to be like, okay, you don't update normally, but if this state value changes, then update. So if I take that out, then it won't update. So use memo is generally used when you're trying to do something like a long calculation and you only want to calculate it once. Like for example, when I was working for Mintent, we had large amounts of data, up to almost 100 megs that were coming in and that we were processing on the front. Not a good thing to do. You don't process things on the front, you process them in the back. But we were processing it on the front, and we wound up using use memo because then the process only ever happened once during the life cycle of the browser, of the application. It wasn't 100 megs. It was less than that. It was a lot of memory, though. I think it might have been 100 kilobytes. It was still a fair chunk of change. Any questions about use reference, use state, use effect, or use memo? No? Cool. Let's move on to context. Context is a little bigger, and we actually need to do a bunch of things to do the setup. So use context is like an answer to Redux for some people. Sorry, wait. I'm not clear on the count. Oh, so what that does is it will trigger the use memo calculation. So the calculation that we have in use memo, this won't update more than once. So once the whole component renders to the screen, this will only ever calculate once and it won't do it again. So as you can see, it says calculating. Doesn't matter how many times I click this button, it will only ever say calculating once. However, the brackets here, if I put count in here, I'm now saying you need to listen to the state value of count. So it actually listens to the state value. So now what happens is anytime the value of count changes, this calculation will happen again. So now you'll notice that as I hit the button, calculating inside my console keeps continuously happening. Yeah. So if we take that out, then we don't have to worry about that happening, and it only ever calculates once. Cool. Good question. Thank you. All right. Context. So context is the great answer to global state availability, meaning that, like we said, the browser is stateless, but, you know, passing state through from parent to child can be super tedious because you have to remember that you did that. And, like, for example, we passed it through one child, right? We passed it from App.jsx to do. But what if I need to pass it from not only to do, but to remove and to do, and a whole bunch of other things? If I need to make sure that that state value gets passed down through 3 or 4 children in a hierarchy, now we're starting to lose the context of our state. And it becomes a little bit less readable to people looking at our code that are trying to follow the state value back up to the original parent. It can get really complex, really convoluted. So one answer to that is Redux. Redux provides a global state that allows you to be able to access state anywhere within your application. You just provide a state provider and off it goes. Then when you need to access certain things from the Redux global state, you just do. And it's really super simple. React already has something like that built in called context. Context has 2 pieces to it. It has a provider and it has the context value. Or sorry, a consumer. It has a provider and a consumer. So the provider will actually pass context through the children all through the global application, through its own children. Doesn't matter at what level those children are. You could provide it a parent element, for example, as a child to the provider. All of its children will automatically have access to this without you needing to pass state down. They just gain instant access to it by being a child of the provider. So let's create a provider. I thought I had more information on this with the provider and consumer. Huh. Alright, that works. So we're going to go to context, and we're going to open up userprovider.jsx, and it's going to be a nice empty file. In this file, we're going to create a component, like we've done so many times now. And we'll call it user provider, same as the name of the file. And we'll export that. And we'll also make sure that we return something. So to create a provider, we need to create something called a context object. The context object allows us to store values in it. And that's the thing that we're actually going to be accessing from our different children of our provider. So in order to do that, we have to import something called the create context module. So let's add the destructured import statement, and we'll import create context as well as use state, because we're going to need both those things. Once we've imported those, we're going to do something a little different that you haven't seen yet. We're going to create a second export. So far we've exported a default. We're actually going to create an export of a different module that we'll be able to import into other things. So we're going to do export const user context equals create context. So to import this, what we'll do is import brackets user context from /userprovider.jsx. That will allow us to import that. This one we can just import the regular way, just like we're importing React up here. Same kind of principle that you see here. So this is going to return a context object that will be available to any component that consumes our context. So we're exporting the object as well as our default export so that we can import it separately. So this is our default export. This is the named export. Next, we need to create a provider component that we can simply import. This is much easier if we use the provider component as a parent and then just render anything placed inside. So props automatically has access to something called children. We talked about this before, that when you create two tags separated and you add something in the middle, that content in the middle automatically becomes a child. So we're going to return the user provider dot provider, like so. And in the middle, we're going to render children from props. So I'll do a destructure here and automatically pull children out for ourselves. And then we'll add children in here. This is kind of a nice, clean way to format this. You don't have to do it this way, but it is nicer to format it this way. Oh, sorry, I used user provider. It's not user provider. It's user context. I was trying to figure out why it's calling itself. That doesn't make a lot of sense. That'd be some nasty recursion. So we're almost done with the provider component. We also want to pass values down through the component to its children. So to do this, we add a value attribute to the provider and give it initial sets of values. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some state values. We'll create a state value and a state setter. So we're going to do const, and this one we're just going to call user and set user. And we'll make that our state provider. And then we'll add an attribute to this called use value. And I just want to return an object. So I'm going to put the object in the middle with user and set user. And that will just basically create a property set that looks like this. But you don't have to write it like that. JavaScript actually lets you do it in a shorthand way, where if you do it this way, it automatically creates a key called set user with a value called user, and a user property with a value called user. Makes it a little easier to look at. Still with me? So that's it for our provider. That's our entire provider module that we just created, or component. This is under source, components, hooks, context, user provider .jsx, and this is the code. So in order for our context object to be available to other components, we have to make it the topmost parent. Every child within, including grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-great-grandchildren, etc., will have access to the context object. So the context object is this thing right here, if they request it. So we can actually see this in action. We're going to provide it down. you're going to see a file in here. I'll split my screen just in case people are still typing this thing out. And on this side, we'll open up index.jsx. So again, this is in context. So I'm in hooks, context, index.jsx. And you can see I have a little file in here, right? It says const context. And I'm returning a layout, and there's nothing in between the middle of it. I'm just going to hit Control B to collapse my sidebar. If you forget where we are, there is breadcrumbs on my screen here. Hopefully you can see them. So the first thing I'm going to do is import my user provider. So I'm going to import user provider, like so, from /user provider. And I haven't hit enter. I have a lot of students make this mistake that they think I've put this on the next line. Make sure you pay attention to the line numbers. You can see that it's just, I have word wrap on, so it will automatically wrap to the next line. That way students don't get lost as I'm zipping about. We only have so much real estate to play with here. The next thing I want to do is put my user provider inside here and then wrap every component that's going to have access to the user provider within the user provider. So I'm going to do it like this, and now all the children inside here will have access to any of the user providers. Actually, I'll even add a div in here with a class name equal to my-5, like so. So the provider will provide the context object to the children. There's another piece to this puzzle called a consumer. A consumer is a component that accesses the context object. So one way to think of this relationship is like a publisher and a subscriber, right? The provider will publish any changes to the context object, and the consumers who are subscribing to the provider will update when that change is provided. Okay, so it's a pub-sub kind of relationship. So we're going to open up login.jsx, and I'll put index.jsx over here just in case people are still writing that out. And you only have one login. It is under hooks context, but you should be able to find it. So we use the use context hook to consume or subscribe to the providers. So we're going to load that hook in. Use context. So I'm importing it as a React module. And then we're also going to need to import our user's context. So I'm going to import, and this is the one that we named inside our user provider. User context from user provider. So a lot of moving parts to a user provider, to any kind of provider. I made an app a while ago, and I just created a global state provider, and everything I needed was in the global state provider. So I did it once instead of having multiple providers. That you can do multiple providers, and sometimes you don't want the provider wrapping your whole application. Maybe you only want it wrapping a small portion of your application, right? Or a specific provider for each type of your application. The general conception that you should be taking away is that this provides a global state object for you. Makes it a little easier to set and forget kind of stuff. Alright, so this is our login that you see here, and I want to access that set user and user context, and I can by doing this. Const set user, which is that value we got from user provider that we set up here, right? So that's this value right here. And I access that from the use context, and then I provide it the context I want to use, which is user context. This is a lot to remember, and thank God that the React documentation makes this a lot easier, because you just go there to read up on it and quickly put it together. But I have overly simplified this as well, so you can always use this as a note to yourself. in the future if you wind up a job working with React or Node. Node, sorry, working with React or Next.js or something like that. Some kind of flavor of it. All right, so what's going to happen? We have set user, and like Leo was asking, was it Leo? I think it was Leo that was asking. We're just going to use the useState function directly in here, but I want to split these guys apart because it does make it a little difficult to read when they're all clustered together like this, and I know it's gross, it's ugly. A lot of people that come from loving the flow of CSS and keeping things nice and separated hate it when we do it this way. So I'm just going to add the onClick event right in line here. And like I said, we can't use the setter directly, so I can't just do set user, it won't work. We have to call it with an arrow function. And I'm just going to set the user to true. Just basically, hey, yeah, dude's logged in. So we have another one we need to do as well. We have log out. And log out is obviously going to do the opposite of log in. It's just going to set the user to false. Right? So let's go ahead. I'm just going to open up log out on my right side screen here so that you can see it. There you go. So login's on this side, log out's on that side. I'm going to clean this up so it's a little bit easier to read. There you go. And once again, just like we did with login, I need to import the context object. So this is going to look exactly the same, and this is how you would do any consumer. You're going to import your context object, like so. You're going to grab all your values from it. So again, I'm just going to use set user here. Like so. And then I'm just going to create my onClick function in here, which is really just doing the opposite to what the login one is doing. To false. So once again, we're building a consumer. A consumer will consume the context object. That's super important to understand. So the user provider will publish the context object. The consumer consumes it, subscribes to the context object. So anytime the context object changes or updates, just like any state value anywhere, anything that's subscribing to it will also update. All right, on the left-hand side here, I'm going to open up the last component that's going to consume, and that will be display.jsx. And just like the other two, same idea, you're going to import the user context. Oh, I do see a mistake I made, though. We're going to import the user provider, but also notice that in logout.jsx, I forgot to import use context. We definitely need to import that or it won't work. So make sure in logout.jsx you're importing use context. And then in display we need to do the same thing. Okay? So in logout.jsx, in login.jsx, and in display.jsx, all three of those consumers, we have to make sure we're importing use context as well as the user context object we created. We can't miss those, so make sure you didn't miss those. As I did. Now we can go ahead and grab our context object value, but this time instead of set user, we're going to grab user, because we'll just display something based on whether or not they're logged in or not logged in. And we'll do something called a ternary. So what a ternary is you check a condition. Based on the condition, you execute some sort of expression if it's true. Otherwise, you execute a different expression if it's false. It's a very common way to write conditional views inside of React. So I figure it's the easiest way to do it. I like to take it nice and slow. So is anybody still lagging behind a bit? Because I don't want to go too far. Does anybody need to catch up before I move on? All right, I'm going to take you at face value. So we're going to write a ternary. The first thing I like to do is just write the JSX JavaScript interpreter brackets, or whatever they're called. I never remember the name of the stupid things. And then I'm going to write my condition, which is user. I'm just going to check to see if user has a value. I'm going to write my question mark, which is the ternary operator that says, hey, is this condition true or false? Then I'm going to execute some code between those brackets if it's true. Otherwise, which is denoted by my colon, I'm going to execute some code between these two if it's false. So that's the first thing I do. I write my statement like this because it's much easier to visualize. Now I can start breaking things apart in order to see what they're going to look like. So the first one I'm going to start with is my true statement. I'm going to put a paragraph in here and just say, you are logged in. Nice and simple. And then in the other statement, I'm going to write a P statement in here saying, you are logged out. Very simple, very clean, very easy. I'll provide you that block. That's in our display.jsx file. So we have login, log out, and display, and all three of those things are consumers. We have our user provider, which has already defined our values and is currently wrapping our consumers. We're wrapping our consumers in our index.jsx file, which I'm going to open up here. And as you can see, here's our user provider. So that is passing our user context object down to login, display, and log out. Well, it will be once we import those. Right now we haven't imported them. We definitely need to import them in order for that to function properly. So that's our next step and our last step. We need to import those three things. So we need to import login from, you guessed it, nope, not user provider, that's for sure, login. We need to import log out. Go, and we need to import display. So I'm importing login, log out, and display in my index.jsx file. Now these three components can go into play. So I kind of like to have display first. I don't really care which order you put them in, but I'm going to put display first, then log in, then log out. And I'm going to click on context over here to see if it's working. Yeah, sure enough, it says I'm logged out currently. By the way, we can make these buttons look like they're kind of merged together if we just wrap them in a div. And we give it a class name of button group. So I'm going to give it a class name equals to button group, spelled correctly. See, now they look like they're merged together. So if I click login, boom, I'm logged in. And that's because what's happened is the login, right, has set the user to true and passed that back up to the user context. Set it in the user context. The user provider has detected that change and passed that change down to everything subscribing to it, which is the logout and also the display. Logout doesn't give a damn. It's not going to do anything with it, but it's also not using the user value, so it shouldn't affect it anyways. Would be interesting to add a console log to see if it does, but I don't think it does. However, when I click logout, same thing happens. It goes right back up to the user provider, sets that value. User provider sends it back down to the subscribers, to the consumers, which is like display, and then it changes and updates. Expected string or class function, but got undefined. Element type is invalid. In what file? It should tell you the file that it's currently happening in. In user context? Did we create a context file? We created a user provider file. It's a runtime error. It should still tell you what file the error is occurring in. Check your console. So like in your console, see if it's throwing an error in the console itself. If it's just happening in the browser's console, like you said, it's a runtime error. I don't think I'm getting one. Hold on, let me see what's going on. I haven't actually looked. Usually what causes that is when one of these things is not returning properly. Your children aren't defined? Oh, so yeah, your render method of user providers, something's wrong with your return statement then, likely, Leo. That could also be it. Did you forget the export line on line 15?
Sean?
Yes.
Avase is also getting a children are not defined error.
Okay, so Avase needs to make sure that in the user provider that he has, that he has destructured the value of children there. So you have the export statement. Do you have a return statement, Leo? Like, are you returning this and there's no syntax errors? It can compile sometimes, but there can still be like a logic type error. Hold on. Yeah, it's definitely a logic error. All right, 1 second. Let's. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. Yes, that's exactly what I was just about to say. All right, Leo, go ahead, share your screen.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Perfect. So is there anything in particular that you want to look at? It did compile successfully, so let me just bring up my browser real quick and show you what's going on. Every other page and every other, component worked, no problem, as I was following along. The only problem arose with context, and
yeah, I saw why.
if you could show me where actually I should be looking in this error log, because I mean, I'm guessing it's in the root index, but
No, it's
that
in
wasn't
user
helpful.
provider.
It's in what, sorry?
It's in user provider. The above arrow occurred in the user provider component. So if you open up user provider, I saw where the issue is. You see how you have user.context.user provider? User provider isn't the correct thing. It's just provider.
Oh.
So it's like a sub function. It's a method of user context.
Oh, okay. There we go. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries, Lou.
That's that. I appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
All right, so that is actually it. That's all I have for you guys today. You are welcome to leave early. Any of those of you that are having an issue, I am here to help. I do have to dodge out at 5:45 though, because I have students in the PHP class that are having issues with MySQL that I have to assist. But I can help anybody up to 5:45.
Sean, do you mind to just screen share again with the whatever you had before? It had children and something on it.
Yeah. Probably this.
I think so. Abase is just looking back and forth for a minute here.
Yep. No problem, Nick. Thanks.
So my context is still, there's issues in the context. This is a waste again.
Okay. So you're having issues with the context. Do you have an error message or anything of this?
Yes, I do. It's just looking.
It'd probably be easier for you to share your screen than me share mine.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I can do that.
Yeah, and make it a little bit quicker for me to find the error.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Module build error. User context has already been declared. Sorry, I need to see that message better. In components display .jsx. What? Can you open up display.jsx for me, please? It looks like it's your last tab.
Okay.
Yeah, sure enough. So you see how on line 1 you have use context, comma user context? You're technically loading the library in twice, so get rid of that one. Yeah.
Just the one, getting rid of just
the one.
user?
Yep, just the one and the comma. Go, save that. Looks like logout's having the same issue, so go to logout. Oh wait, hold on. We got a different error. Go back to display.jsx. I think you removed too much. No, sorry. So you removed the whole React statement. So you need to import React still. And use context, not user context. So it should look like... Hold on, let me just send you this in the chat. At the very top, line 1 of display.jsx, it should say that. The thing I just sent in the chat. Okay, so in logout.jsx we have an issue, so go to logout.jsx. And in this one it's because we're missing use context altogether. So that same line that I gave you, line 1 needs to look like that. A comma after React. You need a comma after React. So import React, comma, and then, yeah. There you go. Hit save. Let's see. Parsing error. Identifier use context has already been declared. Can I see the error, please? Go back. Oh, yeah, because you have it on line 3. Get rid of line 3. I don't know why it wasn't there before. I think the linter's just throwing extra stuff in. Use state cannot be called inside a callback for userprovider.jsx. Can you load userprovider.jsx, please? Not used inside a callback. Use state. Export cont user. That's correct. User provider equals. Yes, that's why. So on line 5, you have too many arrows. You don't need that first 2 parentheses and the first arrow. So you have const user provider equals, that's fine, but then get rid of those 2 parentheses and the arrow. Keep that one.
Children, like the right after user provider?
Yes, right after user provider, you'll see this. You need to get rid of that. Not that. Don't get rid of children in that. That needs to stay. Just that, yeah.
Just that part right there?
Delete that, and then the 2 parentheses before it. The brackets before it. Perfect. Save that. Alright, what errors do we have now? Waze, can you switch to the console tab? It's much easier for me to see your errors. Thank you. Let's see. Object is not a function. Ooh, boy. Can you go to login.jsx for me, please? Let's see here. Const user should be correct. Use context. Yeah, user context. Unclick. Set user true. Login. What? Line 5. Const user equals user context. User context. Oh, right, because it's use context, not user context. So it's 5. Line 5 should be use context with user context passes the argument. The first user context should be use context. That. Yeah. So change that to use context, which is the hook. Make sure it's a lowercase u. There you go. Save that. And now it appears to be working. Just like a general piece of advice. Inside login.jsx go back there. Mm-hmm. See how you're calling the function, but then your argument is spaced between the call function and the actual arguments. That should be next to it. So those brackets should be right up against your function call. You shouldn't add a space between your arguments and your function call because it gets confusing. It almost looks like a function definition as opposed to a function call. So instead of use context space bracket user context bracket, it should be use context bracket user context bracket. That's general convention in programming. So get rid of that space. So right after you use context, you have a space there. Get rid of that space. There you go. So whenever you do a function call, you want to make sure it's the symbol name, right? So the symbol name would be use context, and then your argument list, which is what goes between those parentheses. And you want no spaces in there, that way it reads as one statement, right? That's common convention. You had it in a few other places, so you should go look and see where else you're doing it and correct it. Yes, JavaScript won't throw an error, but if you get into things like a JavaScript linter, the linters will throw errors and yell at you and tell you that it's wrong. So just want you to be conscious of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
also,
no problem.
Before, it was to do with the...
Use memo, wasn't it? Or no, use reference, I think. Yeah.
With reference, yeah. When we're using the scroll function?
Right.
The number was increasing, but the number wasn't increasing itself.
Let's see. So you have the delta decrement and increment. Increment is correct. Can you go to reference in the browser and show me the effect, so to speak? Just close the console window because everything else is pretty much fine. Yeah, okay. So hover over top of the middle number and scroll up. Nope, not over that. Yeah, there. It's working. Yeah, it's totally working.
Oh, yeah, it is now. Yeah, okay. I didn't know you had to be over the thing, so.
Yeah, you got to be over the middle thing. Yep. Cool. Is that everything?
Yep, I think that's everything. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. You do. Cheers. All right, just before I jet, Austin, Bence, Cameron, Sky, do any of you have any questions, or are you all good?
I'm pretty much done the project right now. I was wondering if you could maybe just take a quick look at it. I'm pretty sure you cover it at the end, but the way that you have like your thing named, I guess it kind of confused me. Like I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing, but
sure.
If you could take a quick look, I'm sure you could figure out what's wrong in like a second.
Absolutely.
Alright. How do I share?
If you click share, it's going to load up a whole bunch of screens. Just choose the one with your code.
Okay, I'll do this one, and then hopefully, can you see that?
Yep, perfect.
Alright, so yeah, so right now I've just have it as a list, I guess, because I wasn't sure necessarily exactly how you wanted to do it, and that's how you do it in how you did it last week, so it's a little bit easier for me to understand. I can change it obviously after.
Yeah, no worries.
But as you can see, obviously it's not showing up, which I know was a problem you were having at the end, and what you had to do was you originally had it named as input to-dos, as name, and then you had to switch it to to-do for it to work properly. Now, I just added these S's in. They didn't originally have that, but I'm not sure because it's not working. Like, no matter what I'm doing here, I'm getting the same thing.
So if you look at the input field that you created in your form, do you see what your name attribute is?
Input field in here?
Yep.
Oh, name txt. Is that supposed to be this?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Alright, well, hopefully. Awesome. And then, so did you want it to just kind of go as like this, or did you want to
that's perfect.
to just do one at a time?
No, that's absolutely perfect. That's more than what was actually requested, so that's perfect.
Oh, awesome. Alright, well, thank you very much.
No problem. Cheers.
You as well. I'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Yeah, no problem, Benz. Have a good night.